the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Meet Marcus Collins, the architect of some of the most famous ad campaigns of the last decade, who argues that culture is the most powerful vehicle for influencing behavior in his new book, For the Culture, the power behind what we buy, what we do, and who we want to be. It's a great interview. Let's listen in now. Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me. Now, I see in your bio, you're a Michigan-type person, Ann Arbor. Is that where I'm finding you today?
Yes, sir. I am very much a Michigan-type person. Born and raised in Detroit, went to Michigan for my undergrad and my master's, and I'm now a professor here. So I love the place so much that I couldn't leave it.
Fantastic. Well, close to Canada, close to the border. Spent lots of time Windsor-Detroit border, that's for sure. So very familiar. Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what you do for a living. I mean, you got big brands and familiar names as part of your experience. And I was reading through your index, and it reads like the index of zeitgeist and memes for the past decade as I was going through those names. But tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for a living.
Well, I'm a product of Detroit. Now I start that way because I feel like it's very much about who I am and how I see the world. And I had the fortunate pleasure of putting ideas in the world as a faculty member at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan in the marketing department, and also put ideas in the world as a practitioner. And I think about those two worlds converging at a space that bridges academia, the things that we rigorously interrogate, to how we practice them, what it means in real life. And over the course of my career, I've had a chance to work with some of the biggest brands in the world across a myriad of industries to help them activate people in such a way that gets them to move in a collective fashion. And that's really what I study as a researcher, what I call cultural contagion, or what is called cultural contagion. Understanding how people make meaning and how we legitimate brands and branded products, ideas, messages, and politicians, organizations, and the like into our cultural practice.
Now, you describe in the book this blend of academia and practice as the biggest cheat code in your career. Talk more about that insight and the kind of how you get to work with these brands through your agency affiliation and then integrate it into your academic work.
Well, academia, by and large, is just trying to understand the world around us. And a better understanding of the world around us helps us see the world in a much clearer fashion than we wouldn't without things like theory. And I call that a cheat code because I take those things that people way smarter than me have interrogated and deconstructed, and take those learnings and apply them to the work that we do on a day-to-day basis in the world of advertising with brands and branded products. And I call it a cheat code because we don't do enough of it. We don't look at it a lot. We don't study it a lot. And when we do study it, though, when we do understand it, we have a much better chance of leveraging its power. And since I've been engaged in this world of academia, I feel like my work as a practitioner has increased dramatically. I mean, just a hockey stick growth as a practitioner. And, I try to tell people who are early in their career, like, do a lot of reading now, study the behavioral sciences, and you'll be far better in your practice than I was at their age.
Well, I like that hockey stick reference, by the way. There's a throw to the Canadian audience from the Detroit
for that one.
And shout out for the Detroit Red Wings.
That's right.
Your thinking around that really resonates with me. I have another podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, who's a professor at Dalhousie. He's called the Food Professor, and he does exactly what you describe. And we have a great time on the podcast because I come from the business world. We talk about grocery and food, and he's a blend of the academic and practice as well. So that really resonates with me. What you're saying, I can see immediately the benefit of it. Now, you work in a lot of categories: music, sports, entertainment. The first 20 pages of your book, there's already several examples of beer campaigns: Pabst Blue Light, Budweiser. What is it about that beverage that is so powerful? I don't know whether it makes it a barometer of culture. Is it just the pure amount of money spent with advertising agencies and the sheer volume of messages?
Well, I think that product, to your point, it benefits from a few different things. One, there is a ton of media that is spent to promote those products, those branded products, and therefore they have an outsized voice in the marketing production or production of the cultural production of marketers. But also the product is used used in tandem in these occasions that are culturally driven, whether it's sports, music, our sit down, barbecues and relationships with our people. We go get a drink together. The product in a lot of ways, the lubricant for social interaction, and therefore it tends to find itself in the throes of marketing opportunities within cultural executions.
I was in Amsterdam last year, and I went on a tour of the Heineken brewery. Ever been on that tour? Have you ever happened to be in Amsterdam?
I have not. I've never worked on Heineken, so I haven't been motivated so much to do the tour.
They're not a client, so I'm not going to do the tour.
Right. Now, I did Anheuser-Busch.
You're a hardcore brand guy. I'm not going to drink that beer. No way. I don't even want to talk about it. Cancel the podcast. Get off the podcast. Anyway, there's a quote in and on the tour. There's some posters, and one of them says, "There's always something interesting happening when there's a beer on the table." Now, I want to turn our minds to some very recent events that are happening connected to beer. Proving it's got a powerful voice in the culture. Now, what do we make of all this? Is this just a demonstration of the power of beer to move or be used by in culture? What did you make of all that?
Well, I think to the point of Heineken's quote is that beer has license to be a part of all these different moments that we would consider cultural moments, whether the production of cultural work through music, whether there's sports that we engage in. Whenever we're entering the discourse, we do it over a drink. I mean, it has a right to be there, and therefore it has license to partake in the social discourse in which it is adjacent. I think things get a little
more
messy.
than adjacent lately, right? More than
exactly.
Like it's now part of some kind of shooting gun thing. I mean, it's kind of gone crazy a little bit, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's actually, I think the interesting part here is that while these brands have license to be a part of the discourse, the question is, does the brand have something meaningful to say? When you take a brand like Bud Light, I would argue that Bud Light was really credentialized to be a part of the discourse when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community. I've worked on Bud Light for years and years ago. Almost 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, actually, and I actually did work on marriage equality that Bud Light was a part of. We did campaigns around it. We did messaging around it. And Bud Light had long been an advocate, a supporter, an ally of this community, realizing that this community was important to them as a commercial entity. So for them to tap a trans influencer in Dylan Mulvaney, that made a whole lot of sense. Of course they would do that because they've been about that life for years. The sad part is that the moment that they were met with resistance, they flinched.
They did. I mean, and then, I don't know much about the deep details, but it looked like they threw the poor product manager under the bus as well. So, it was a random act. Like they didn't just flinch. They really more than backpedaled. Is it just, they just found themselves in a corner and it just became too much energy around the brand?
Well, I think that I wasn't in the meeting. I weren't in those rooms. I wasn't working the account at the time. Sure. I don't have all the understanding of the nuances that went on, but as an outsider looking in, it didn't help that the marketing manager actually was vocal about the challenges that she had navigating this brand in the current landscape. I think that didn't do any favors, but also for the brand to distance themselves from the manager didn't look good. Just all these things don't look good. I think that's actually the major takeaway for me as a marketer and as an academic here is that, their use of the influencer, was it good or bad? Well, it depends on how you look at it. For some people, it was bad. For others, it was good. And when it comes to culture is the realized meaning-making system. It is how we make meaning of the world. And the world around us is not objective. It is subjective. And what's right or wrong, good or bad, depends on how you see the world. And for Bud Light, to walk away from its manager or to distance itself from its marketing manager, it did not look good to some people. It may look good to others. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It all depends. And because the world is subjective, not objective, then you as the brand have to be guided by a very clear conviction, a way you see the world.
Right.
Some cultural characteristics that govern what you do. And I think that when a brand flinches, when they backpedal because of resistance, it looks like, oh, you're not convicted on this thing either way. So as a result, when one side, the opposition is pushing against you, and then you sort of back away from the community that you were supporting, just kind of sit in the middle and be safe, then you become sort of meh to everybody.
I guess the counterpoint to that would have been Nike's execution around the Colin Kaepernick, right? I mean,
exactly.
I wouldn't say even double down, but they did almost the opposite, right? But that was these things are also calculated risks or opportunities, depending on how you look at it, right?
But they're somewhat calculated. I mean, none of it is predictable.
Yes,
I think for
sure.
Nike has long said we stand for athletes, and we're always going to stand with the athlete. I mean, we saw it even with Tiger Woods when he was experiencing his public downfall. Nike was the only endorser that stood with them because they stand with athletes. In the case of Colin Kaepernick, they stand with athletes. And when people were burning their Nikes, Nike said, okay, cool. We stand with athletes.
I'd love to have for another podcast, a broader discussion on the nature of culture and sports together. But for now, I want to get to what brought us together, which is in your book, For the Culture, the power behind what we buy, what we do, and who we want to be. Now, you're an academic, accustomed to writing. Was crafting this book easy for you? Was it capturing on the page decades of thought, or did you have to extract it out? And talk about your experience writing the book.
It was the tale of two cities, the best of times and the worst of times. I
wrote a great summary. The publisher said, yes, now you got to deliver on time kind of stuff.
In a lot of ways, it was that. I mean, I think that, the contents of the book were things that I've been ruminating on for years, things I've been studying for years, things I've been practicing for years, but never quite coalesced into prose that would get to a very clear articulation and ultimately help people leverage the thinking. I'm newer to the academic world than I am the practicing world. I've been practicing far longer than I've been an academic. So the idea of crystallizing thoughts into something that could be interrogated and ultimately leveraged is a new muscle that I've been working out. And so this first outing was really powerful for me and also painful in that way of I want to make sure that my colleagues on the academic side say that, the way you describe that idea, you maintain the integrity of the thinking. But also on the practicing side, I want to make sure that my colleagues, my clients, my students who want to practice understand the idea that it's not too esoteric, it's not too abstract, that it is clear, digestible, but also it has a lot of integrity to the thinking as well. And then balancing that was a challenge for me. And thank God I had such a great editor to kind of keep me on the straight and narrow, constantly saying, I don't know what this means, Marcus, or is this,
or say more about this or whatever,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that process for me has just been unbelievably helpful. While it was painful going through it, like all new things are and should be, it was really helpful for me as I think about these ideas and try to articulate them in ways that people can do something about them in classrooms, on stages, in boardrooms, and in consultation opportunities as well.
Who'd you write the book for?
I wrote the book for practitioners first, for people who want to get people to move. Ultimately, I mean, the book at its core, it's that. It's to help people get people to move. So it's focused on people who have a vested interest in getting people to adopt behavior. That's not only marketers, but that's leaders, managers, activists, politicians, entrepreneurs. In some ways, all of us, one would say. And I would never say that the target was everyone, but it was definitely people who have a very clear intention to get people to adopt behavior. But I also realized while writing it from a pragmatic perspective that there were some personal things that unearthed that there were these invisible forces that we call culture, that those things influence so much of what we do on a daily basis. So many of our decisions, if not all of them, are influenced by our cultural subscription that we don't even know them because we don't have the language to describe what's happening to us. And because we don't have the language to describe it, we don't have much agency to do anything about it. And the hope, as I was writing this for practitioners, was also for writing it for me, for Marcus 20 some odd years ago, who went into engineering because that's what you're supposed to do if you did well in math and science as a high school student, especially if you were Black. Good night. And I went into engineering because that's what the expectations were of me. And while I enjoyed engineering somewhat, but I definitely was fascinated by it, I didn't think this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. But I didn't know how to undo that. I didn't know how to push against that because I didn't have the language to describe what I was experiencing when I experienced the resistance or the obstacle in those early college years. But now that I have better language, the hope is to talk to people who were like me, who are like me now, trying to figure out their life and saying, I think I'm supposed to do this because those are the conventional wisdoms. Those are the expectations and conventions of people like me. However, we do have agency to explore things that may not seem like I must do this. And I think that's a really powerful takeaway that I didn't realize that until I started writing the book. And it didn't really click for me until I finished the book.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the book, give folks a bit of a sneak peek about what it's all about. So culture, that's one of those words that's often used. Maybe its meaning becomes a bit lost because I think it gets overused sometimes. But unpack culture for us. Yeah, I think you've been doing a fantastic job so far. But take us on a quick tour of the book. What's the through line, central theme that you'd like readers to take away and learn specifically, just to give them a sense of the book that's going to be in their hands, hopefully shortly after this interview.
Amen. So the argument of the book is pretty straightforward, that there is no external force more influential to human behavior than culture, full stop. I mean, everything we do, how we dress, how we adorn ourselves, where we work, who we marry, if we marry, where we go to school, if we go to school, where you vacation, what you eat, how you bury the dead, if you bury the dead, all these things are byproducts of our cultural subscription. But the challenge is that we don't have the great language to define it. So what is culture? I think about culture through a Durkheimian lens, that culture is the system of values, symbols, and norms that demarcate who we are and what people like us do. Right there, it's a system of systems that consists of conventions and expectations that govern daily behavior. And we take on these behaviors, we do these things, we don these artifacts, we speak in a certain way, we consume certain cultural production, not because of what it is, but because of who we are. And the book takes that perspective and illuminates it throughout different case studies, different contexts, and then provides the reader with the skills, the tools that one might need to leverage culture in an effort to get people to adopt behavior.
There's so many great examples in the book. I want to focus on one. I'm just going to pick one that kind of resonated with me, but a lot of them did. You tell the interesting story about Peloton, and I found it fascinating when it was happening and even after the fact. A no doubt very well thought out ad about gifting a Peloton that went entirely sideways on them. What happened there? Right ad, wrong context? How do big sophisticated companies or ad companies miss the downside, or is it just caught up in a broader cultural context that just kind of gets accelerated by the platforms or whatever happened there? Talk about that one for a sec.
It's exactly what you said. Cultural context. What is cultural context? We know what culture is. It's this system of systems, of conventions and expectations. But what is context? It's meaning. And culture is the realized meaning-making system. Culture is the means by which we make meaning. And this is where Peloton went wrong. And it's so unfortunate because Peloton has an amazing product. I used to do some work with Peloton. So the people I know are amazing also. But they missed the mark, not because of ill intent. They missed the mark because they didn't understand the context. They didn't understand the meaning. That is, they didn't understand the way by which people would see this ad and translate it. And the problem is that they put this thing in the world, and many people, many people were offended by it. And said, "What are you doing, Peloton?"
Yeah.
Because they missed the perspective that was not their own. They missed the perspective, the way by which the ad would have been translated. And when it was, they got a lot of blowback because of it, not because of ill intent and not any lack of intelligence. It's really just a lack of perspective, a perspective that is not your own. And therefore, we as practitioners, as marketers, as people, as human beings, we do a better job of being empathetic, of seeing the world through lenses that aren't our own.
You know, this is what I find so compelling about your book is that context or the idea of culture and understanding business decisions, right? That's what I really liked about the book. Now, I'm gonna ask you a funny question. If you could turn back time, I'm gonna go a bit share on you since you're in cultural, and of course everyone now is humming that to themselves. Yeah. If you could go back and turn back time, would you eliminate social media? Has its role in shaping, maybe reflecting, and some say manipulating and distorting culture become so big that it's become larger than culture and the cultural context itself? And how can brands operate in this environment for good or ill? Or it's such a minefield.
Yeah, well, no way would I turn back time and get rid of that. No way. I mean, think of the value. Let's first talk about what is social media. Social media is the media of people by definition. Social is people, and media is the vehicle by which information is transferred from one source to another, transferred and stored from one source to another. So social media is the media of people. We have been social since the beginning of time. These technologies, however, facilitate the media of people such that we're able to get access to things faster. The social learning that happens faster. So it's much more prolific. It is accelerated, but it's driven by what is natural, what is human, to connect. These technologies, they have so much benefit to them. They have benefited us tremendously from a social perspective, from a business perspective, from a societal perspective. But just like all things, there are negative consequences. And we've experienced them. Things like misinformation, right? Bullying. These things are, Marshall McLuhan put it this way. Another Canadian, by the way.
Yes, of course.
Marshall McLuhan put it this way, that that technology are merely extensions of human behavior. And all the things that we have used, all the technology we use are extensions of who we are. So social networking platforms also are just extensions of humanity. And while we're still figuring out the implications, the negative implications that come with social media, the media of people, negotiated or facilitated through these technologies that we use, for us to destroy it, to get rid of it, I feel like we have to do a far greater calculus to see if the benefits outweigh the negative consequences. And by and large, I would say they have, and they do. I mean, there's civil unrest in countries that we wouldn't even know about if it weren't for the agency that was given to the people to engage in discourse. I mean, it's through this discourse that we are collectively negotiating, constructing meaning, and we're deciding what people like us do. We are making culture collectively through these technologies. And that's really powerful stuff. I mean, really, really powerful stuff.
Interesting. Last couple of 3 questions. I know how long I have a sense for how long it takes for anybody to write a book or just go through the book process from the beginning to the end. You probably wrote some of your book during the COVID era. You touch upon it in the book. Do you think that we understand what changes, structural changes, I mean, not just the temporary ones to buy more toilet paper or patio heaters, that shared experience meant to culture and in our context, marketing and retail marketing?
So I think that we know it intuitively, but it's hard for us to describe. And I suppose there's so many things in life that abide by those sort of principles. We know what it is, but don't have the words to use it. And culture sits right in the crosshairs of that. To our earlier point, when we have the language, it just unpacks so much agency for us that we can look and describe what's happening to us and around us. And we can say, okay, here's why this is an issue. we could fix this. We can tweak that, whether it's societal culture, whether it's familiar culture, the thing that how our family operates, whether it's corporate culture, how our organization operates, or it's consumption culture, how brands and branded products interact with humanity. It's easy for us to use blunt instruments to describe things without any nuance. And the nuances humanity is nuanced terribly. And without it, we tend to miss the really important parts. Even your question about social networking platforms, imagine if we didn't have that during COVID. Good night. We would have been extremely disconnected more than we already were. So I think that it's important for us to look at the nuances, to understand the subtle shades of gray, so that we might be able to fully leverage the opportunities that are at our disposal. And language helps us do that in a massive way.
Last question, advice to brands and retail marketers listening. And I'm going to ask you to frame it in 2 starts and 1 stop. How can they take your wisdom and insights from the book and your background and history and wisdom and put it into practice? So 2 things they should start doing right away, and 1 thing they should stop doing. Maybe you just observe it doesn't work, or maybe it used to work and it doesn't. What do you think?
Start investing yourself in the social sciences. There are people who are way smarter than me who have spent their entire lives studying one specific thing about humanity. And they have been so gracious with their knowledge, with their brilliance, and shared it with the world through publishing. That those works that they have committed themselves to will help us see the world better. That's the first start. The second start, I would argue, which I do in the book, that we should think of ourselves as comedians. Learn from stand-up comedians. Stand-up comedians observe human behavior and go, wow, that was interesting. That was an interesting phenomenon. That was an aha moment. Or
the reason people still watch George Carlin videos, right?
That's right. So you see people, you go, that was odd. Moment. Yeah. And then you say, well, why is that happening? Well, then we apply theory, what people have studied, to what we have observed as a way to describe what is going on. And when we do that, we can then go on stage and say, hey, you ever notice that we do this happens, and we all laugh and go, that's so us.
I never realized that before. Yeah.
Great intimacy. Yeah. Like, these guys aren't just funny. They are great observers of humanity. And they have a really rich repertoire of theory to describe what's going on. And they do it. They tell all the truth and tell it with a slant, as Emily Dickens puts it. Right. And when we do that, we connect with people in really powerful ways, and comedians have locked that in totally. All right, 2 stops now, right?
No, 1 stop. Or you could give me 2. That's like a bonus because I'm a retailer. So yeah.
All right, let's do 2 stops.
All right.
The first stop: stop using demographics. They are terrible. They are blunt objects that don't accurately describe people. They're just not true. Right? Age, race, gender, household income. These are the hardware of people. But we're not governed by. We don't move because of the hardware. We move because of the software. The software, that's our culture. Those are the identities that we subscribe ourselves to. They're the beliefs and ideologies that help us see the world. Start looking at people based on their cultural subscription, not based on demographics. And the bonus second, if I were to give one. Stop thinking that your worldview is the only worldview. The world is not objective, it is subjective. And the better we understand it, the faster we understand that, the better we'll be as marketers.
Well, my guest is Marcus Collins. His book, For the Culture, The Power Behind What We Buy, What We Do, and Who We Want to Be. I'm assuming, because I checked it out, your book's available at all the places people would love to buy books. How can folks get in touch? Are you a LinkedIn person? Or let's talk about that for a bit.
I am all the socials persons. You can find me at Mark to the C, MarkTothec, at all the social places, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere.
Well, fantastic. Well, Marcus, thanks so much for joining me on the mic. It's been a real pleasure to chit and chat with you. It's a great book. I'd recommend it to anybody within the sound of our voice right now, and you'll definitely learn something and benefit from your experience and wisdom. So once again, I wish you continued success, and thanks for being on the pod.
So grateful. Thank you much.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis, and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, president of Emmy LeBlanc and Company Inc., Maven Media, and keynote speaker. If you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Safe travels, everyone.